You know that moment when your entire world crumbles, but instead of falling apart, you just start laughing. That's exactly what happened to me when the man I thought I'd spend forever with looked me straight in the eyes and told me I wasn't worthy of being his wife. But here's the thing about karma. It has a wicked sense of humor. And sometimes the universe delivers justice in the most unexpected ways. Let me take you back to where it all began. Because this story isn't just about a breakup, it's about finding yourself again after someone convinced you that you weren't enough. Elliott and I had been together for just over 4 years when everything fell apart. In the beginning, those first 2 magical years felt like a fairy tale come to life. We moved in together after 18 months. And even though my parents weren't exactly thrilled about us living together before marriage, I didn't care. This was the 21st century, right? We seemed perfect for each other in every way that mattered. We'd binge watch the same shows until 3 in the morning, laughing at the same jokes and arguing over plot twists. Our weekends were spent discovering new local restaurants, trying dishes we couldn't pronounce and rating them on our own ridiculous scale. We could talk for hours about absolutely nothing and everything all at once. The kind of conversations that make you lose track of time completely. The little things he did made my heart flutter like a teenager with her first crush. I'd wake up to find my favorite coffee waiting on the nightstand, still steaming hot because he'd timed it perfectly with my alarm. During long work days, my phone would buzz with TikToks he'd sent because something reminded him of me. It was normal couple stuff, but it made me feel like I'd finally found my person. You know that feeling when everything just clicks into place? When he proposed on our 3rd anniversary, I thought my heart might actually burst from happiness. He'd taken me back to the lake where we'd had our first date. And in that quiet moment with the sunset painting the water golden, he got down on one knee. The ring wasn't huge or flashy, which was fine by me. It was perfect because it came from him. I posted the obligatory ring photo on Instagram, called my mom while crying happy tears, and immediately dove headfirst into planning our wedding for the following summer. Everything seemed to be falling into place exactly as it should. But here's what they don't tell you about fairy tales. Sometimes the magic starts to fade, and you don't notice until you're already trapped in the story. Something shifted about 6 months after we got engaged, and it started so subtly that I almost missed it. At first, it was just little comments about my appearance that weren't exactly compliments. He'd look at me getting dressed and say things like, "That dress would look so much better if you toned up a bit more." Or maybe you should try a different hairstyle, something more sophisticated. I'd laugh it off, telling myself he was just trying to help me look my best. After all, he had great taste, right? But these comments started coming more frequently, like drops of water that eventually wear away stone. Then it expanded beyond my appearance. He started making remarks about how I should be more ambitious, questioning things I said in front of his friends in ways that made me feel stupid when I didn't know something he thought was obvious. The worst part was how he'd do it with this little smile, like he was being helpful rather than hurtful. He even started making comments about my family, calling them too simple and telling me I needed to elevate myself if I was going to be his wife. Each word felt like a tiny cut, and before I knew it, I was bleeding from 1,000 small wounds. I wish I could tell you that I immediately stood up for myself, that I recognized what was happening and put a stop to it, but I didn't. Instead, I started believing him. I changed my hair, bought new clothes that fit his idea of sophistication, and started working longer hours to prove I was ambitious enough. I even enrolled in online courses because he said I needed to be more cultured. Looking back now, it's embarrassing how much I tried to change for him. But when you love someone, sometimes you don't see how toxic things have become until you're already drowning in it. You start to think that maybe they're right. Maybe you do need to be better. Maybe love means becoming the person they want you to be. I was so wrong. The moment that changed, everything came just 3 months before our wedding. We were sitting at our kitchen table going over final details for what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives, when he made a comment about my wedding dress, which he hadn't even seen because I'm traditional that way. He said his mother was worried I'd choose something expected rather than classy enough. When I asked what that meant, something in his expression shifted. Like a mask had suddenly slipped away. He just unleashed. He went on this cruel rant about how he'd been settling and was starting to realize I wasn't wife material for someone like him. He said his family had concerns about me being able to represent him properly in social circles. Each word felt like a slap. But then came the ones that I'll never forget as long as I live. He looked me straight in the eyes, his voice cold and matter-of-fact, and said, "You're not worthy of being my wife. I think I can find someone better." I just sat there, completely stunned. For years together. And that's what he thought of me. That I wasn't worthy. Who even says that to someone they supposedly love? But here's the thing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg him to take it back. I laughed. It wasn't intentional. The sound just bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, like my soul was rejecting the absurdity of what I'd just heard. Here was this man who I'd been trying so hard to please for months, telling me I wasn't good enough. When the reality hit me like lightning, he wasn't worthy of me. My laughter obviously wasn't the reaction he expected. He looked confused, then angry, demanding to know what was so funny. I just shook my head, stood up from that table, and found my voice. "You're right," I told him calmly. "We shouldn't get married. But not because I'm not worthy, because I deserve better than someone who makes me feel like I'm never enough." I grabbed my purse, walked out of our apartment, and drove straight to my best friend Monica's place. The tears came later that night, when the shock wore off and the reality hit me. For years is a long time to invest in someone, and realizing it was over felt like losing a piece of myself. But underneath all that sadness was something unexpected relief. It was like I'd been carrying this impossibly heavy backpack for months, and someone had finally taken it off my shoulders. I could breathe again. Elliott called and texted constantly over the next few days, his messages swinging wildly between different emotions. First came anger, calling me dramatic and saying I was overreacting. Then came the apologies, claiming he didn't mean it and was just stressed about the wedding. Finally, he went back to being condescending, telling me I was making a huge mistake and would regret walking away from him. I stayed with Monica for 2 weeks while figuring out my next steps. Canceling a wedding is an absolute nightmare. By the way, wedding insurance is worth every penny if you're planning one. But my friends were incredible. They helped contact vendors, return gifts, and break the news to guests. My parents were supportive too, though I could tell my mom was worried about what people would think. Small-town gossip can be brutal. The hardest part was going back to get my things. I deliberately chose a time when I knew he'd be at work. But of course, he showed up halfway through my packing. He switched between begging me to reconsider and coldly telling me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. He actually said, "Good luck finding someone else at your age." As if 29 was ancient. What struck me most was how he seemed more concerned about appearances than actually losing me. He kept saying things like, "Everyone's going to be talking about this, and my family has already told everyone about the wedding." Not once did he say he loved me or would miss me. That's when I knew for sure I was making the right choice. I found a small apartment across town and threw myself into making it truly my own space. It was the first time I'd lived completely alone, and honestly, it was liberating. I could decorate however I wanted, watch whatever shows I liked without commentary, and just exist without constantly being evaluated. The first month was rough. I'd wake up reaching for him or think of something I wanted to tell him before remembering we weren't together anymore. But slowly, I started rediscovering parts of myself that had gotten lost in our relationship. I picked up hobbies I'd abandoned because he found them childish. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from because he didn't click with them. About 6 weeks after the breakup, I heard through mutual friends that Elliott was telling people I'd had some kind of mental breakdown, and that's why I ended things. Classic Elliott, rewriting history to protect his ego. I considered setting the record straight, but realized it didn't matter what people thought. The people who mattered knew the truth. About a month after my last update to friends, I heard the news that initially hit me harder than I wanted to admit. Elliott was seeing someone new. Her name was Daisy, and apparently she was everything I supposedly wasn't. She came from money, had some fancy job in the city, and, according to Monica who'd run into them, dressed like she'd walked straight out of a magazine. I won't lie, this news sent me into a bit of a spiral at first. Even though I knew he wasn't right for me, there's something uniquely painful about seeing how quickly someone can replace you after 4 years together. I spent one weekend feeling sorry for myself, scrolling through old photos and wondering if maybe I should have tried harder to be what he wanted. But then I remembered why we broke up in the first place. That "you're not worthy" comment that showed exactly what he thought of me. And I realized something important. No amount of changing yourself should ever be about making yourself worthy of someone else's love. Either they love you for who you are, or they don't deserve you. That Monday, I forced myself out of my apartment and met Monica for dinner. She mentioned that her brother was having a birthday gathering that weekend and practically begged me to come. After some persuasion and maybe a glass or two of wine, I agreed to go. And that's where I met Wyatt. He was Monica's brother's best friend from college, in town for the birthday celebration. We ended up talking most of the night, first in the group setting. But somehow we found ourselves sitting on the porch swing, having this deep conversation about everything from our favorite podcasts to our biggest fears. There was no pressure, no awkward flirting, Just this easy connection that I hadn't felt in maybe ever. I wasn't looking to jump into another relationship. Honestly, I was just learning to be happy with myself again. But sometimes the universe has other plans. And sometimes those plans are exactly what you didn't know you needed. But here's where the story gets really interesting, and where karma shows up fashionably late to the party. 8 months after that awful night when Elliott told me I wasn't worthy, my phone started buzzing with messages from a number I'd deleted but still recognized. Elliott was trying to come back into my life, and his timing couldn't have been more ironic. You see, his perfect new girlfriend, Daisy, the one who is supposed to be everything I wasn't, well, she'd found someone who actually appreciated her worth. And it wasn't Elliott. She'd gotten married to someone else, someone who didn't spend months tearing her down and building her back up in his own image. Elliott's messages were desperate, apologetic, and frankly pathetic. He said he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, that he realized now how good we'd been together, that he wanted to try again. He promised he'd changed, that he understood now what he'd lost. But here's the beautiful, poetic justice of it all. Those messages were being read by my new husband. Yes, you read that right. Wyatt and I had gotten married. It happened faster than anyone expected, including us. But when you know, you know. And what I knew was that Wyatt saw my worth from day one. He never once suggested I needed to change, never made me feel like I had to earn his love or prove I was good enough to be with him. The morning after Elliott's latest round of desperate texts, Wyatt handed me my coffee with that familiar smile and said, "Your ex seems to have some regrets." I looked at the messages, then at this man who'd shown me what real love actually looks like, and I laughed. The same kind of laugh that had bubbled up that night 4 years ago. But this time it was pure joy instead of shocked disbelief. "His loss?" I said, deleting the messages. "His very, very significant loss." And you know what? I meant every word. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting happy. And I was happier than I'd ever been in my life. Elliott was right about one thing. I wasn't worthy of being his wife. I was worthy of so much more than he could ever offer. I just had to laugh my way to that realization. The universe has a funny way of working things out, doesn't it? Have you ever had someone come crawling back just when you're living your best life? Well, buckle up, because this story gets wilder than I ever could have imagined. Remember how I laughed when my ex-fiancé told me I wasn't worthy of being his wife? Well, karma was just getting started, and the universe had some serious plot twists in store. After that coffee date with Wyatt turned into an entire day together, I knew something special was happening. I mean, when was the last time you met someone and lost track of time so completely that you looked up and the sun was setting? That's exactly what happened with us. I was still working through all the emotional baggage from the Elliott breakup, still learning to love myself again, when Wyatt just walked into my life like he belonged there. We exchanged numbers that night, and he texted me the very next day asking if I wanted to grab coffee before he headed back home. He lived about 40 minutes away in the next town over, which felt like the perfect distance. Close enough to see each other regularly, but far enough that we wouldn't rush into anything. That coffee turned into lunch, which turned into a walk in the park, which somehow turned into dinner. We spent the entire day together, and it felt so incredibly easy. He asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to my answers. Really listened. Like what I was saying mattered to him. When he talked about his family, there was this genuine warmth and passion in his voice that made my heart flutter. But here's what really got me. Not once during that entire day did he make any comment about my appearance, my job, or my potential. He seemed genuinely interested in who I actually was, not who I could become or who he wanted me to be. After months of Elliott's constant suggestions for improvement, this felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater. We started dating what I jokingly called long distance, though 40 minutes hardly counts as long distance. He'd come to my town some weekends, I'd go to his on others. We had our fair share of awkward early relationship moments that would have sent Elliott into a spiral of criticism. Like when his Roomba got stuck under the couch during our third date and started making this absolutely unholy screeching noise right when we were having a serious conversation about our past relationships. Or the time I tried to cook him dinner and managed to set off his smoke detector 3 separate times in one evening. The fire department almost showed up because his neighbor thought his house was actually burning down. With Elliott, those moments would have become sources of tension, evidence of my inadequacy. But with Wyatt, they just became things we laughed about. Stories we'd tell friends later with tears in our eyes from laughing so hard. About 3 months into dating Wyatt, the moment I'd been dreading finally happened. I ran into Elliott and Daisy at Target of all places. I'd been mentally preparing for this encounter for months, imagining I'd feel jealous or inadequate when I saw them together. I'd practiced what I might say, how I might react, but when I actually saw them in the household goods aisle, the weirdest thing happened. I felt absolutely nothing, no jealousy, no anger, not even awkwardness. Just this calm recognition that that chapter of my life was completely closed. It was like seeing a movie you used to love but don't connect with anymore. You remember liking it, but you've grown beyond it. We exchanged brief hellos, and I noticed Elliott looking genuinely surprised at how comfortable and confident I seemed. I wasn't the broken, insecure woman he'd left behind. Daisy was polite but clearly uncomfortable, fidgeting with her purse strap and avoiding eye contact. The whole interaction lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like a huge personal victory. I walked away from that encounter feeling lighter than I had in months. I realized I wasn't carrying any anger or hurt anymore. Elliott was just someone I used to know, someone who'd taught me what I didn't want in a relationship. Later that week, I got my first text from Elliott in months. It was casual, almost friendly. Good to see you. You look well. Would love to catch up sometime as friends. I showed the message to Wyatt, who just raised his eyebrows and said, "What do you want to do about it?" He wasn't telling me how to respond, wasn't getting jealous or possessive, just supporting whatever I decided. That response told me everything I needed to know about the kind of man he was. I chose not to respond to Elliott. Some doors are better left closed, and I had no interest in reopening that particular chapter of my life. As for Wyatt and me, things progressed naturally but never felt rushed. After 6 months of dating, he suggested I move in with him since I was already spending most weekends at his place anyway. His house was older but had so much character, and he'd been renovating it himself room by room. You could see his personality in every carefully chosen detail. The idea of leaving my little apartment was scary at first. It had been my safe haven after the breakup, the place where I'd learned to be happy alone. But moving in with Wyatt also felt completely right, like the natural next step in our story. Living together was an adjustment, as it always is. We had to figure out where all my stuff would go in a house that was already fully furnished. We discovered we had completely different ideas about temperature settings. I'm always freezing, he's always burning up. He leaves his shoes right in the middle of the hallway like little ankle-breaking traps. And I have this terrible habit of leaving cabinets open after taking something out. But instead of these differences causing the kind of friction they had with Elliott, they just seemed to balance us out. We laughed about our quirks and found compromises that worked for both of us. It was like we were writing our own instruction manual for happiness. Through Monica, who remained my excellent source of small-town intelligence, I heard that Elliott and Daisy were getting serious. Apparently, he'd taken her to meet his parents, which was something he and I didn't do until almost 2 years into our relationship. I was surprised by how little this news bothered me. If anything, I felt a little sorry for Daisy, wondering if she was experiencing the same subtle put-downs that had slowly eroded my self-esteem. About a month after I moved in with Wyatt, the texts from Elliott started again. Nothing inappropriate exactly, just persistent little messages. How have you been? Heard you moved. Hope all is well. Remember that band we saw together? They're coming back to town. Each time, I either didn't respond or kept my replies brief and neutral. I didn't tell Wyatt about every message because they seemed so insignificant, but I didn't hide them either. Our relationship was built on honesty and trust, and I wasn't about to jeopardize that for Elliott's weird little game. Then came the day Elliott called instead of texting. I was cooking dinner with Wyatt, the kitchen filled with the smell of garlic and herbs, when my phone rang. I could see Elliott's name on the screen, and I felt a sudden spike of anxiety. I showed Wyatt the screen, and he just nodded calmly. "You can answer if you want," he said, giving me the space to make my own decision without any pressure. That simple response meant everything to me. I declined the call. But Elliott left a voicemail asking if we could meet up because he had some things he wanted to say in person. After discussing it with Wyatt, I decided to text Elliott back, saying I was happy in my current relationship and didn't think meeting up was a good idea. His response came quickly. "I understand. I just wanted to apologize properly for how things ended. I said things I didn't mean. Too little, too late. But at least it was something." I thanked him for the apology and left it at that, hoping this would finally be the end of his attempts to reconnect. Life with Wyatt settled into a rhythm that never felt routine. We explored new restaurants, took spontaneous weekend trips, and had game nights with friends that lasted until the early hours of the morning. We talked about future plans casually, nothing pressured, just possibilities floating in the air like dandelion seeds. Then, 6 months after I moved in, Wyatt proposed. It wasn't a grand gesture or an elaborate production. We were having a picnic at a lake, not the same one where Elliott had proposed, thankfully, and he simply looked at me and said he couldn't imagine his life without me. The ring was perfect. A vintage sapphire that had belonged to his grandmother. It caught the late afternoon sunlight and sparkled like captured starlight. I cried, laughed, and said yes without a moment's hesitation. This felt right in every way that Elliott's proposal had felt forced. That evening, as we celebrated with champagne on our porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, my phone lit up with a text from Elliott. Heard about your engagement? Didn't realize things were that serious. Hope you're not rushing into anything you'll regret. I showed Wyatt, who just shook his head and said, some people never change, do they? We decided the best response was no response, and I blocked Elliott's number that night. Whatever weird game he was playing, I was done being a part of it. The next day, we shared the news on Facebook because it's not official until it's Facebook official, right? The outpouring of love from friends and family was overwhelming in the best possible way. Among the comments was one from Monica that made me laugh out loud. From not worthy to worthy of the best man. I know in less than a year, that's what I call an upgrade. I probably should have been embarrassed that she referenced my breakup so publicly, but honestly, it felt like a perfect summary of my journey from heartbreak to happiness. We set our wedding date for 6 months out. Nothing extravagant, just a small ceremony with the people who mattered most to us. As we planned, I kept thinking about how different this felt from planning my wedding with Elliott. There were no arguments about whether the napkins were the right shade of blue or whether my dress was sophisticated enough. We just focused on what would make us happy. About 2 months before our wedding, Monica dropped the biggest bombshell yet. Remember Daisy, Elliott's perfect girlfriend who was supposed to be everything I wasn't? Well, apparently she'd been spending time with Monica's brother Barry while commuting to the city for work. They'd started as train buddies, then coffee friends, and then something more. She broke things off with Elliott rather suddenly, and according to Monica, he was absolutely devastated. I wish I could say I felt bad for him, but karma comes for us all eventually, according to the small-town gossip network. Elliott was telling everyone who would listen that Daisy had blindsided him and that he didn't deserve this kind of treatment. Sound familiar? The irony wasn't lost on me that he was experiencing exactly what he'd put me through, in the weeks leading up to our wedding. I started getting more texts from Elliott. I'd blocked his number after my engagement, but he'd started messaging me on Instagram. Just casual stuff at first, congratulating me on my engagement again, asking how wedding plans were going. I ignored most of them, but occasionally sent brief, polite responses, hoping he'd take the hint and leave me alone. But the messages kept coming, gradually becoming more personal. I've been thinking about us a lot lately, and I realize now I made a huge mistake. I showed Wyatt everything, and he just shook his head, more amused than concerned. He really doesn't know when to quit, does he? The week before our wedding, the messages increased in frequency and desperation. Can we talk? Just for closure. I'd like to apologize in person for how I treated you. And then the one that really got to me. Are you sure you're making the right decision? The absolute audacity of this man to question my decision when he was the one who'd told me I wasn't worthy of being his wife. I stopped responding completely, hoping my silence would finally send the message that I wanted nothing to do with him. Our wedding day was perfect in all the imperfect ways that make something real and beautiful. It rained in the morning, which is supposedly good luck, though it did make for some interesting hair situations. My veil got caught on a rosebush during photos, and Wyatt's 5-year-old nephew announced he had to pee right in the middle of our vows, causing the entire wedding party to dissolve into laughter. But none of those little mishaps mattered. We were surrounded by people who genuinely loved us for who we were, not who they wanted us to be. Looking into Wyatt's eyes as we said our vows, I felt nothing but certainty and joy. And yes, Elliott tried calling me 3 times during the wedding ceremony. My maid of honor Monica had my phone and just silenced it each time. When she told me later, we both laughed until we cried. Imagine thinking your ex would answer your call on her wedding day. The level of delusion was almost impressive. We honeymooned in a little beachside town about 4 hours away, staying in the cutest Airbnb with an ocean view. We spent our days exploring local shops, eating way too much seafood, and just enjoying being together without any wedding stress. It was the most relaxed and happy I'd felt in years. The sound of waves crashing against the shore, the smell of salt air, the feeling of Wyatt's hand in mine as we walked along the beach, everything felt like a dream I never wanted to wake up from. When we got home a week later, tanned and relaxed and blissfully happy, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. I had 177 missed calls from Elliott. 107, plus a string of Instagram messages that started with, "I need to talk to you," and progressed through various stages of desperation to "please don't ignore me," and finally, "I made a huge mistake letting you go." I showed Wyatt, who looked more concerned than jealous. "Do you want me to talk to him?" he asked, his voice gentle but protective. As I scrolled through message after message, call after call, I realized that Elliott's obsession had reached a level that was genuinely frightening. This wasn't just regret or nostalgia. This was something much more dangerous. And that's when I knew the story was far from over. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor. And sometimes the person who once told you that you weren't worthy shows up uninvited to your housewarming party. But what happened next? Well, let me tell you about the day my past collided with my present in the most unexpected way possible. The opportunity for Wyatt to handle Elliott came sooner than we expected. We were still unpacking from our honeymoon, surrounded by suitcases and sandy flip-flops, when my phone rang. Elliott's name flashed across the screen like a warning signal, and my stomach immediately tightened with that familiar knot of anxiety without missing a beat. Wyatt picked up my phone and answered with the most cheerful voice I'd ever heard him use. "Hello, Ruby's phone," he said, like he was answering a customer service line at the happiest place on earth. There was this long, uncomfortable pause on the other end. I could practically hear Elliott's brain trying to process what was happening. Finally, he stammered and asked if Ruby was available. His voice uncertain and confused, but Wyatt remained cool as could be, his tone friendly but firm. "She's a bit busy unpacking from our honeymoon right now. This is her husband, Wyatt. Is there something I can help you with?" The silence on the other end was absolutely deafening. I held my breath, waiting to see how Elliott would respond to this unexpected turn of events. Finally, he stammered something about just wanting to congratulate us on our marriage, his voice sounding smaller than I'd ever heard it. Wyatt thanked him politely, his voice never losing that calm, confident tone. "We appreciate the thought, but Ruby has moved on completely and would prefer not to keep in contact." He wasn't rude or aggressive, didn't raise his voice or make threats. He was just calm, direct, and absolutely firm in setting a healthy boundary. After he hung up, I just stared at him in complete amazement. No drama, no jealousy, no insecurity, no need to prove anything to anyone, just a man protecting his wife and their peace of mind. That, I realized, is what a real partner does. Elliott hasn't called since that day. He sent one last message that simply said, "I understand now. I'm sorry for everything. You deserve to be happy." It felt like the final page of a chapter I'd been trying to close for what felt like forever. Looking back on everything that had happened over the past year and a half, it was strange to think about how absolutely devastated I was when Elliott first told me I wasn't worthy of being his wife. At the time, it felt like my entire world was crumbling around me, like everything I'd believed about love and relationships was a lie. Now I realized that moment wasn't my world ending at all. It was actually the beginning of my real life. I'm not sharing this story to gloat or seek validation, though your supportive comments on my previous posts helped me through some really tough times when I needed them most. I'm sharing this because I want anyone going through something similar to know that sometimes the absolute worst moments of your life can lead you to exactly where you're supposed to be. Wyatt and I started talking about buying a house together, somewhere we could build our life from scratch, somewhere that would be ours from the beginning with no ghosts of relationships past haunting the hallways. We wanted a fresh start in every possible way. So that's where I was at that point in my life. Happily married at 30, starting a whole new chapter, and finally understanding what it truly means to be valued by someone who never questioned my worth in the first place. After months of house hunting, looking at properties with questionable carpet choices and mysterious stains, we finally found our first home together about 4 months later. It was a 3-bedroom ranch-style house built in the 90s, complete with some truly interesting wallpaper choices and a kitchen that desperately needed updating. But it had a big backyard, perfect for the dog we were planning to get. And most importantly, it was ours. Home ownership turned out to be quite the adventure. The day after we moved in, the dishwasher decided to flood the entire kitchen floor, turning our first morning in the new house into an impromptu swimming lesson. 2 weeks later, we discovered that a family of squirrels had been living rent-free in our attic, apparently running some kind of underground nut storage operation. And don't even get me started on the bathroom sink that randomly gurgles in the middle of the night like it's trying to communicate with spirits from another dimension. But honestly, working through these little domestic disasters together turned out to be strangely fun. Wyatt and I discovered we make a really good team. He's better at the heavy lifting and figuring out which tool goes where, while I'm better at organizing the chaos and making sure we don't accidentally throw away anything important. After getting mostly settled and making the place feel like home, we decided to host a housewarming party. Nothing fancy, just a casual Saturday afternoon gathering with about 20 friends and family members. I spent days cleaning every corner of the house, arranging snack platters like I was competing on some cooking show, and making sure our new place looked presentable despite the half-finished painting project in the hallway that we kept promising ourselves we'd complete. The party was going absolutely perfectly. Monica brought her famous buffalo chicken dip that everyone always raved about. Wyatt's brothers helped set up the new patio furniture we'd been so excited about. And everyone was mingling comfortably between the living room and backyard. The house was filled with laughter and conversation, and I felt this overwhelming sense of contentment. Watching our friends and family enjoy our new space, I was in the kitchen refilling the ice bucket when Monica came in with this really weird look on her face. She had that expression people get when they're trying to figure out how to deliver bad news without causing a complete meltdown. She told me that Elliott was outside. Yes, that Elliott, my ex-fiancé who wasn't invited to our housewarming party in any way, shape, or form. Apparently, he'd shown up completely unannounced, carrying a bottle of wine and looking slightly disheveled like he'd been working up the courage to come for hours. Monica had intercepted him in our driveway and was trying to figure out how to tell me without causing a scene that would ruin our perfect party. My first reaction was pure annoyance. This was our day in our new home, celebrating our new life together. The fact that he thought he could just show up after everything that had happened between us was beyond presumptuous. But then I took a deep breath and realized something amazing. I wasn't even nervous about seeing him. That familiar knot in my stomach that used to appear whenever I thought about running into Elliott was completely gone. I felt nothing but mild irritation at the inconvenience. I told Monica to let him in. It seemed easier than creating drama by turning him away and having him lurk around outside like some kind of rejected party crasher. I went to find Wyatt, who was in the garage showing his dad the storage system he'd installed, and was incredibly proud of when I explained the situation. Wyatt just raised his eyebrows and asked what I wanted to do. Again, no jealousy, no territorial behavior, no need to prove his masculinity. Just genuine support for whatever decision I wanted to make. Have I mentioned how much I absolutely love this man? We decided to greet Elliott together, keeping things civil but not overly friendly. When we walked outside, he was standing awkwardly by the snack table, looking completely out of place among our friends and family. He'd clearly had a few drinks before arriving, not sloppy drunk, but definitely loosened up enough to think showing up uninvited was a good idea. He handed me the wine bottle, which was ironically the exact same kind he used to criticize me for buying because it wasn't sophisticated enough for his refined palate. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I accepted it graciously. The conversation started painfully polite. He complimented the house, asked standard questions about the neighborhood, mentioned how nice the weather was, all while giving Wyatt these weird sideways glances like he was trying to figure out what made him so special. I could feel the tension building in the air, but I kept things moving along, introducing him to people as an old friend, which felt incredibly generous considering our history. Things took a dramatic turn when one of Wyatt's cousins innocently mentioned how happy Wyatt and I seemed together and how perfect we were for each other. Elliott mumbled something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like she wouldn't be here without me. When I asked him to repeat himself, the floodgates opened completely. He launched into this absolutely bizarre speech about how he had prepared me for Wyatt, how his criticisms had motivated me to improve myself, and how I should actually be grateful for our breakup because it led me to where I am now. I was too stunned to respond immediately. The sheer audacity of this man to take credit for my happiness was breathtaking. But Wyatt calmly stepped in, his voice steady and controlled. He didn't raise his voice or start a confrontation. He simply said that while he was certainly grateful that I was in his life, my personal growth had nothing to do with being torn down by someone else. He added that we'd prefer to focus on celebrating our new home today. And maybe this wasn't the best time for this particular conversation. Elliott didn't take the hint. Instead, he turned to me with this look in his eyes that I recognized from our relationship, that mixture of arrogance and false vulnerability that he used to manipulate situations. He asked if I ever thought about what could have been if he hadn't let me go. His words, not mine, as if he hadn't told me I wasn't worthy of being his wife. The way he said it, like he was doing me some kind of favor by considering taking me back, instantly transported me back to that awful night when he'd broken my heart and my spirit in one devastating blow. But this time, instead of feeling small and inadequate, I felt strong and sure of myself. I told him as gently but firmly as I could that I never think about what could have been because I'm too busy being grateful for what is. I explained that breaking up was the best thing that could have happened to both of us, and that worthiness isn't something someone else gets to decide for you. It's something you realize about yourself when you're finally free from people who make you question it. The look on his face was complicated. Surprise, confusion, maybe even a flash of regret. For a moment, I thought he might actually understand what I was saying, that he might finally see how wrong he'd been about everything. But then he looked around at our friends, our home, our life, and something shifted in his expression. He muttered something about how I'd changed, like that was somehow a bad thing, and that I didn't used to be this cold. Before I could respond, Monica stepped in with absolutely perfect timing. She mentioned that she'd run into Daisy and Barry last weekend at the farmer's market. Apparently they're expecting their first baby in the summer and just bought a house across town. She showed us all a picture on her phone, and they looked genuinely happy and in love. Watching Elliott's face as he processed this information was like watching someone solve a really difficult math problem. He seemed genuinely shocked that Daisy had moved on so completely and found happiness with someone else. When Monica casually mentioned that Daisy had told her the relationship with Elliott had been a learning experience, I thought he might actually explode from the implications. Instead, he drained his drink in one gulp, mumbled something about having another commitment, and headed for the door like he couldn't get out of there fast enough. Wyatt, ever the gentleman, walked him out while I stayed behind with Monica, both of us trying not to make eye contact until he was completely gone to avoid bursting into completely inappropriate laughter. When Wyatt came back, he just shook his head with this amused expression. Elliott had apparently asked him, man to man, if I was always this stubborn. Wyatt told him he preferred the term self-assured and suggested Elliott take an Uber home since he'd clearly been drinking. The party continued without any further drama, though I definitely noticed a few curious glances and heard some whispered conversations. Small town life means this will probably be local gossip for at least 3 weeks. But honestly, I didn't care anymore. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Elliott that simply said, "I'm sorry for yesterday. I didn't mean to cause a scene. I hope you're happy." It was simple, a bit ambiguous, but probably the closest thing to real closure I'll ever get from him. I didn't respond because some conversations are better left ended. So that's it. Life isn't perfect, of course. Our roof needs replacing sooner than we thought. We still argue about whose turn it is to take out the trash. And I sometimes struggle with the echoes of insecurity that Elliott planted in my mind. But through it all, I've learned that worthiness isn't something you earn by changing yourself to please someone else. It's something you recognize when you're finally with people who never questioned it. In the first place, your support and kind words helped me through some of my darkest days. And I'll never forget that kindness when I needed it most.